They didn't just accuse me, they publicly dragged my name through the mud at my own husband's memorial service. And all I said back was, "Go ask your mother what happened to the college fund she drained before she left him for your soccer coach." My name is Linda, and if you told me 5 years ago I'd be the villain in a story I didn't write, I'd have laughed in your face. I used to believe kindness always came back around. But try marrying a man with 2 angry teenage kids and a vindictive ex-wife, and tell me how long you keep that faith. David and I met later in life, both in our late 40s, both divorced, both battle-scarred but hopeful. He had 2 kids. Ethan, then 17, and Maddie, 15. I had no kids of my own, just my job as a cardiac nurse, and a quiet townhouse that had once been my refuge after a messy split. David was different. Gentle. Steady. He made me believe in clean slates. The kids, however, didn't. I knew winning over teenagers wasn't going to be easy. What I didn't realize was that their mother, Chelsea, had already built me up as the monster long before I met them. To them, I wasn't Linda, the nurse who made pancakes on Saturdays. I was the woman who stole Dad. Even though their parents had split years before I came into the picture. We took it slow. David insisted on family dinners, open conversations, therapy. But you can't build on land someone else keeps poisoning. Chelsea would send snide texts during holidays. Glad to know the kids are celebrating with the replacement. Or she'd accidentally send screenshots of big purchases, like her new Lexus, with the caption, "Single life perks, face blowing a kiss." Still, David and I pushed forward. After we married, he insisted on rewriting his will. "You should be protected," he said. "We'll set up trusts for the kids, but the house and savings, those should be secure for both of us." I didn't argue. He was a grown man and I never asked for a penny. What I didn't know was that Chelsea had already promised the kids something else entirely. Fast forward 3 years. David's cancer diagnosis hit like a freight train. Pancreatic. Stage 4. We fought. We prayed. We tried every clinical trial that would take him. But 13 months later he was gone. That's when the gloves came off. The memorial was packed. Nurses, neighbors, old friends, and of course his kids, now in their 20s. I was shaking hands, hugging strangers, doing my best to keep breathing. Then Ethan stepped up to the mic. "I just want to say one thing," he said, voice cracking. "Our father always wanted us to have the house. He worked his whole life for it. But instead of honoring that, some people decided to rewrite history while he was dying." I froze. Maddie chimed in. "And it's not just the house. The inheritance, the accounts, everything's just gone. We were told it would be ours. And now it's in someone else's name." They never said my name. But they didn't have to. The room went silent. My sister gripped my hand under the pew. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear what came next. After the service, whispers followed me like shadows. Did she really take everything? They're his kids. How could she? I heard she didn't even tell them about the will. And the worst part? I stayed silent. I didn't want to be the woman who clapped back at a funeral. I didn't want to expose secrets David had taken to the grave. But when Maddie posted a long emotional diatribe on Facebook accusing me of stealing her father's legacy, and tagged me in it, I knew I couldn't stay quiet forever. So I messaged them both. "You want answers? Ask your mother what happened to the original college fund account." It only took 2 days before I got a call. Maddie. Screaming. Accusing. Then crying. Chelsea had told them for years that David had drained their inheritance to spend on his new wife. What she didn't mention was that she had emptied the kids' joint trust account before David and I even met while going through her affair-fueled divorce. She used the money to cover credit card debt and invest in a now-defunct interior design business run by her then-boyfriend, the kids' former soccer coach. David had tried to rebuild that money later. He took out life insurance and wrote them into the will. But the house? The joint savings? That became ours after the wedding. I didn't take anything. I didn't need to. It was all in writing. The twist? David had actually written each of the kids' personal letters sealed and left in our safe. I'd forgotten about them until I was cleaning out his dresser 3 weeks later. Maddie's letter was heartbreaking. He apologized for not being stronger during the divorce, for letting her believe lies, for not protecting her from resentment. He explained everything, even the trust account, how it had been emptied, how he tried to make it up, how he hoped she'd understand someday. I scanned the letters and sent them to the kids. No caption. No drama. That's when the silence started. The Facebook post disappeared. I got no apology but also no more threats. Just nothing. Until last week. Ethan showed up at my door. Not angry. Not shouting. Just, "Hello. I didn't know," he said. "She told us it was you. That you manipulated him." I offered him coffee. He declined. "I sold my car last year to pay for school," he said, eyes damp. "I thought Dad abandoned us." "He didn't," I said gently. "He just didn't know how to fight her anymore." Ethan stared at the family photo still on my mantle. David, me, the kids. Smiling. Forced smiles, but smiles nonetheless. "You're not the villain," he whispered. I didn't cry until after he left. But now here I am, still wondering if I did the right thing. If I should have spoken up sooner. If telling the kids to ask their mom was just another way of passing the hurt around. I didn't lie, but I let the truth hit them hard. And maybe that's the worst kind of honesty there is. You'd think that after the truth came out, there'd be some sort of resolution. Some kind of closure. A neat little ending tied up with forgiveness and understanding. But life doesn't give you Hallmark movie endings when you've been painted as the villain for years. Life gives you awkward silences, unreturned texts, and the occasional uncomfortable run-in at the grocery store. After Ethan's unexpected visit, I didn't hear from Maddie for weeks. Not a word. Not even a passive-aggressive comment online, which frankly was its own kind of peace. I tried not to expect anything. I told myself that her silence was her version of processing, that she might never come around, and that was okay. But a month later I got a letter. An actual handwritten letter, tucked into an envelope with no return address. I opened it at the kitchen counter, next to David's favorite mug, which I still couldn't bring myself to move. "Linda, I don't know how to apologize for what I said at the memorial. I was angry. I wanted someone to blame. Mom made it so easy to hate you. She told us you manipulated Dad. That he cut us out because of you. That the house was promised to us and you took it. She never mentioned the trust fund. Or the letters. Or the fact that she emptied our savings to fund a boyfriend's startup. She told us she was investing in our future. I feel stupid. And angry. At her. At myself. At Dad. But mostly I feel tired. I miss him. And I hate that I spent the last 2 years resenting the wrong person. I'm not ready to talk in person. But I'm not ready to hate you anymore either. Maddie." I sat there for a long time just holding the paper, rereading it until the words blurred. It wasn't a hug. It wasn't redemption. But it was something. The thing about grief, especially shared grief, is that it can either fracture people apart or fuse them together in the most unexpected ways. And in the weeks that followed, it seemed like something small but real was beginning to mend. Ethan started stopping by once in a while. Never for long. Sometimes to pick up a box of his dad's books. Sometimes just to sit in the backyard and sip iced tea like David used to. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, he asked, "Do you ever think Dad knew how much she turned us against him?" I looked over at him. His face was leaner now, more serious than I remembered. Life had aged him, grief too. "He knew," I said. "But I don't think he could bring himself to confront it. He just kept trying to be the peaceful one." Ethan scoffed. "That's what Mom always said. That he was weak. That he didn't fight for us." I didn't want to defend David or Chelsea, but I couldn't let that narrative keep twisting. "He wasn't weak," I said. "He just didn't believe in hurting people back. Even when they hurt him." Ethan nodded slowly, looking like he didn't quite know what to do with that information. It was around that time that a different kind of storm hit. One I didn't see coming. Chelsea called me. I hadn't heard her voice since the week after David died, when she left a mocking voicemail saying, "Enjoy the house you stole." So when her name flashed across my screen, I almost didn't answer. Almost. But something told me to pick up. "Linda," she said, like we were old friends catching up. "I need a favor." I didn't say anything. She sighed. "It's about Maddie. She won't talk to me. Neither of them will." "Maybe they finally started asking questions," I said, keeping my voice even. She paused. Then in a clipped tone said, "Look, I know I wasn't perfect, but they're my kids. You've turned them against me." I laughed. I couldn't help it. I didn't have to. The bank statements and missing college funds did that. She was quiet again. And then came the bomb. "I'm getting married again. To someone new. I want Maddie there. But she said she won't come unless I apologize. And I figured maybe you could talk to her." I nearly dropped the phone. "You want me to convince your daughter to come to your wedding after everything you did to her? You're the one she's listening to now," Chelsea snapped. "You stole my family. The least you can do is fix it." That was when I realized something important. Chelsea wasn't sorry. Not for the lies, not for the manipulation, not even for what she did to her own kids. She was just panicking because her shiny new image was cracking. She wanted forgiveness as a prop, as a photo op, not because she'd earned it. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just said, "I think it's time you sit in the mess you made." And I hung up. A few days later, I told Maddie about the call. I didn't want to pressure her. I just thought she had a right to know. She laughed bitterly. "Of course she wants me there. She probably already bought a mother-daughter spa package and a matching dress." "She didn't apologize," I said quietly. "Not really." Maddie nodded. "She never does." Then she surprised me. "But you did. Not with words but with honesty. And honesty matters more." I didn't realize how much I'd been holding my breath until that moment. We started rebuilding slowly. Coffee meetups. Texts. Few photos shared here and there. I learned that Maddie was studying to be a social worker. That she'd been struggling with anxiety for years. That she still had nightmares about being caught in the middle between her parents. "You were the only adult who didn't try to win," she said once. "That's why I resented you. Because you didn't play the game. And I thought it meant you didn't care." She was wrong, of course. I cared more than I ever said out loud. I just knew the game was rigged and I refused to play a part in poisoning them further. Then came another twist. One rainy Thursday morning, while organizing David's things in the attic, I found a dusty old fireproof box behind a pile of moving blankets. Inside were envelopes. Dozens of them. Receipts, notes, documents I'd never seen before. And a USB drive. I plugged it into my laptop and sat frozen as I read what was on it. David had been documenting everything. Emails from Chelsea. Financial statements showing the trust account withdrawals. Screenshots of texts where she threatened to make the kids hate him if he didn't let her have full custody and sell the lake house. There was even a letter he had written titled simply, "In case the kids ever turn on you." It was addressed to me. "Linda, if you're reading this, it means they blamed you. I hope I'm wrong. But I know Chelsea and I know what she's capable of. I've tried to fix what she broke, but I know some things can't be undone in one lifetime. You loved them, even when they didn't love you back. You protected them from the worst of it. If this ever becomes a question of character, show them this. Show them everything. And tell them I never, not for one day, regretted making you their stepmother. Love, David." I sobbed. Full-on, shoulder-shaking sobs. Alone in that dusty attic, with only the sound of rain and my dead husband's voice echoing through words on a screen. I sent the documents to Ethan and Maddie that night. No message. Just a folder titled, "What Your Father Couldn't Say." 3 days later, I got a voicemail from Maddie. She was crying. "You didn't just save our dad's legacy," she said. "You saved us from hating the wrong person for the rest of our lives." I knew then that this wasn't just about property or money. It was about truth. About memory. About the stories we choose to believe and the ones brave enough to rewrite them. And as the storm outside finally gave way to sunlight, I felt something shift inside me too. Not closure, but peace. Peace. That strange, unfamiliar silence had taken root in my house again. But this time it wasn't hollow. It was a different kind of quiet, the kind you get after a long, brutal storm. Not everything was healed. Not everything was fixed. But the wreckage had stopped falling. And I could finally breathe. The kids know young adults now began reaching out more regularly. It started slowly. A forwarded meme from Ethan. A selfie of Maddie holding a cat she adopted from the shelter. I responded, always careful not to push. There was still fragility between us, Like walking across an iced-over pond where the cracks weren't fully visible yet. But we were trying. That meant something. Then, a new chapter started writing itself, one I hadn't prepared for at all. Maddie showed up on my doorstep one Sunday morning in April. Hair tied in a loose bun. Hoodie soaked from the rain. No warning, no text, just her and her tightly balled fists. "I need to tell you something," she said. I opened the door and let her in without a word. She paced my living room for a full 5 minutes before finally blurting. "She told me to lie." My stomach dropped. "Chelsea?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Maddie nodded, eyes glassy but burning. "She told me that if I ever wanted to stay with her during Dad's weekends, I had to say you were mean, that you made fun of my clothes, that you were trying to keep Dad from spending money on us." I sat on the edge of the couch. I remembered those weekends. The fights. David crying silently in the bathroom after Maddie screamed at him that she hated me. It all made sense now. "She said I had to protect her," Maddie continued. "That you were trying to erase her. And I believed it. I mean, I was 14. I wanted someone to fight for me. But she was fighting for herself. Not me." I didn't know what to say. The pain in her voice was raw, jagged. "I thought if I hated you, I was being loyal to her. But now I see I was just her cover. Her pawn." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was so cruel to you. And you still made me pancakes. You still gave me rides. You still kept my prom dress in the dry cleaner's bag, even after I said I never wanted to see you again." I got up, crossed the room, and wrapped my arms around her. "You were a kid, Maddie," I said softly. "And you were hurting." "I still am," she mumbled into my shoulder. We sat on the couch for hours. She told me about her therapist, about the guilt she'd been carrying, about how, for years, she thought she'd never have a normal relationship because she didn't know what love looked like unless it came with manipulation. "I see now," she said, "that the safest I ever felt was in this house, even when I was angry. I don't know how long we stayed like that, curled up with blankets and old memories, but it felt like something sacred had cracked open, and not in a way that needed to be stitched shut, but in a way that let the light back in." A week later, Ethan came by with an old guitar slung over his shoulder. It had been David's. He'd found it in the garage of his college apartment, warped by humidity and years of silence. "I thought maybe you'd want it," he said. We spent that afternoon restringing it together, our fingers clumsy but warm. He didn't talk much, but before he left, he turned and said, "I don't blame you anymore. I don't even blame Dad." I smiled. That's a good start. Then came another unexpected twist, this time not from the kids, but from David's side of the family. His sister, Karen, who had always kept her distance from me out of loyalty to Chelsea, emailed me. She wanted to meet for coffee. I almost didn't go. I assumed it would be another confrontation, more accusations, more digging through emotional mud. But something told me to give it a chance. Karen arrived 5 minutes early, already seated, coffee half drunk, eyes tired. "I owe you an apology," she said immediately. "A big one." I blinked. "Oh." She pushed a manila folder across the table. "I didn't believe you. When the kids lashed out, I assumed you'd manipulated David. Chelsea always said you were after the house." "And now?" I asked. She sighed. "Now I've seen the receipts. Literally. Ethan sent them to me." I looked at her, surprised. "He did?" Karen nodded. "He said it's time the family stopped blaming the wrong person." For a moment, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "She told us all for years that she was the victim," Karen continued. "That David left her penniless. That you refused to share anything. I should have known better. I did know better deep down. But I didn't want to deal with the fallout." I appreciated her honesty, even if it came late. "She asked me to help her get a lawyer," Karen added. "She wanted to sue for emotional damages." I choked on my coffee. "Of course I told her to go to hell," Karen said with a sharp smile. "She's not getting anything. Not from you. Not from the kids. Not anymore." That felt like closure. Not perfect, not fairy tale, but real. It was strange how things began to unfold after that. One quiet olive branch at a time. I received a wedding invitation from Maddie, not for Chelsea's wedding, but for her own. She'd met someone kind, Someone patient. They'd met at a grief support group and bonded over shared scars. "I want you there," she wrote in the card. "Not because of who you were to my dad, but because of who you are to me now." The line made my throat tighten for a week. Then came Ethan's graduation from his master's program. He asked me to be there too. Told me he'd saved me a seat next to his girlfriend who said, "You're Linda? Oh my God. I've heard so much about your banana bread." I laughed. And cried. And laughed again. One afternoon, months later, I was going through a drawer in the kitchen when I found an old Polaroid photo wedged behind a cookbook. It was of all of us, David, me, Ethan, Maddie, sitting in the backyard grilling burgers. Everyone was smiling. Genuinely. No performative grins, no tension behind the eyes. Just happiness. I'd forgotten we'd ever had a moment like that. I framed it. Set it on the mantel right where David's urn used to be. And that night I finally opened a dusty old journal I hadn't touched since before the cancer diagnosis. On the first blank page I wrote, "Grief didn't break us. Lies did. But truth, real, brutal, messy truth, stitched us back together again. Not the same but stronger. And I'm no longer afraid of the silence. 'Cause now I know what fills it." David used to say life isn't about winning, it's about staying in the room long enough to be understood. I never really grasped that until now. Because the truth is, I didn't fight Chelsea. I didn't scream back at Ethan or Maddie. I didn't claw my way to vindication. I just stayed. And staying despite the rumors, the grief, the betrayal, that was what made the difference. In the months after Ethan's graduation and Maddie's engagement, something strange began happening. People started rewriting their own versions of the story. Quietly. Privately. Subtly. David's old coworker, Tim, reached out on LinkedIn to say he never believed the rumors. My neighbor, who once told a mutual friend that Linda must have been a gold digger, dropped off homemade soup after I got the flu. Even the woman from church, who once whispered too loudly in the pew behind me, came up and said, "I was wrong." Not everyone apologized. Not everyone acknowledged what they'd assumed or said behind my back. But I didn't need them to. I had already heard the only voices that mattered. Then, something happened that shook me in a different way. One early evening just after dinner, Maddie called and said, "Mom's in the hospital." I froze. What happened? Panic attack, maybe? Or a breakdown? I'm not sure. She's been spiraling ever since we cut her off. And now I think she's finally hit rock bottom. I didn't know how to respond. Compassion wasn't what I felt, not immediately. But guilt crept in, unwelcome and bitter. "I don't know what to do," Maddie said. "I'm her daughter. But I don't know if I owe her anything anymore." There it was. The echo of the question I had asked myself over and over. What do we owe the people who hurt us when they finally need help? I didn't have an answer. But I offered to drive her to the hospital if she wanted. We sat in silence in the waiting room of County General. I brought her coffee, she didn't drink it. I handed her a tissue before she asked. We didn't speak until the nurse told us Chelsea was stable and could have one visitor. Maddie looked at me, and for a second I thought she might ask me to come with her. But then she stood up alone. "Wait here," she said softly. I nodded. When she returned, her face was unreadable. "She cried," she said simply. She said she's sorry. But it still felt like a performance. Like she was saying what she thought I needed to hear. "Do you believe her?" I asked. "I believe she's scared," Maddie replied. "But I don't think she's ready to be honest." We didn't talk much on the ride home. Just listened to the rain tap against the windshield. Each drop like a memory refusing to be forgotten. Over the next few weeks, Chelsea began texting again. At first Maddie ignored her. But eventually she responded with firm boundaries. "I'm not cutting you out," she wrote. "But I'm not going to forget what you did." That text, she later told me, felt more powerful than any scream. Because it wasn't about revenge, it was about reclaiming control. Summer turned into fall. The leaves fell in slow motion, like the final pages of a chapter being closed. Maddie's wedding was held in a sun-drenched garden with fairy lights and white linen chairs. It was intimate, gentle, full of sincerity. When she walked down the aisle, I saw a woman, not a wounded daughter. Not a girl shaped by divorce and resentment, but a woman choosing a future not defined by her past. She gave me a seat in the front row. When she handed me a rose during the mother-daughter tribute, I bit the inside of my cheek so hard to keep from crying that I tasted blood. Later that night, she took the mic and said, "There's one person I want to thank who isn't technically family, but showed me more unconditional love than anyone. Linda, you were never just a stepmother. You were a constant. And that changed everything." I cried then. Openly. Shamelessly. Ethan danced with me during the reception. He told me he was applying for jobs at hospitals, hoping to go into nonprofit healthcare. "I think it started with watching you," he said. "How calm you were. How much people trusted you. I never thought I'd feel pride like that. Not maternal pride exactly, but something adjacent. Something deeply earned." In late fall, I decided to sell the house. Not because I was forced to. David had secured everything to protect me, but because I was ready. The home had done its job. It had held the grief and the pain and the rebuilding. Now it was time to let it breathe for someone else. Maddie and Ethan helped me pack. We laughed over the ancient popcorn machine David had once insisted we needed. They fought over who got to keep his old hiking boots. We made sandwiches and took breaks every hour. The house rang with a warmth it hadn't felt in years. On the last day, I stood in the empty living room and let myself cry, not for what I lost, but for what I survived. And for everything that came after. I moved into a smaller place across town. Just 2 bedrooms, a balcony, and lots of sunlight. The first night, I sat with a glass of wine and reread David's letter. "You protected them from the worst of it." I realized I had also protected myself. Not by fighting, but by refusing to lose who I was in the middle of the war. One day, years from now, Maddie might tell her children about the woman who wasn't her mother but who stayed when things got ugly. Who loved them enough to wait. And if she doesn't, that's okay too. 'Cause I know who I was. I wasn't a thief. I wasn't a monster. I was the one who stayed in the room long enough to be understood. And finally I was